Hello everybody, you're very welcome here this evening. My name's Paula Carroll and I'm just going to MC you through the evening. So in a couple of minutes I'll introduce the topic and our speaker for tonight, but first of all I just wanted to say a word of thanks to Tony Kirby and to Expo for inviting me here tonight. I live on what's known as the other side of the county, over in East Clare, so I don't get to Expo's events very often at all. But I've been aware of ye for the longest time, and I've been an admirer of Expo for a very long time. And in trying to think about what I felt Expo is for this evening, I was going, they are a community movement and a community centre, but not just that. They are a heritage group and an environmental movement, but not just that. They're an arts movement and an arts centre, but not just that. Somehow you seem to have combined all of these things in a very far-thinking way. And the longer I work in heritage, the more I realise that's the way I want to work as well, because none of these things are boxable and separable from each other. And it's just really interesting to see you doing such cutting-edge work for years now, combining all of those ways of viewing the world. So I just want to say thank you for doing that work. Please continue leading the rest of us along this path. And I'm just going to call on Tony Kirby to say a couple of words to you this evening.
Paula, thanks a lot for that. Hundreds of post offices have been closed in Ireland over the last 20 years, and hundreds more will. And Expo in Killaloe is one of the few that's ever actually reopened, and reopened as a public space in 2007. And it reopened as an art space primarily, but with a bit of a community input as well. But it's evolved heavily since then, and the activities there now, the core activities at the Expo are the singing club and the Irish language curriculum, their weekly events, and they're the backbone of the Expo today. We also have heritage talks, and it's the first time in 17 years we've had to move out of the Expo to hold a heritage talk because it's too small a space for it, hence the ex situ tonight. We do film evenings, a book club, open mic and field trips as well. The one thing we're looking for tonight is we're looking for a couple of volunteers to plug a few gaps, to help with existing events or to walk in the door with any new idea you have. The last thing I'll say is that on Monday evening next we're having a medley of events, so it'll be a great time to come along to see what we're at. And it's our closing event of the year because we do close out for the summer. And it includes music and song, and also the showing of a film called Estuary, which is a 25 minute documentary on wooden boats, reed cutting on the Shannon Estuary. And we'll also show rushes of a new documentary that Colin Johnson is making on the reed cutting, in particular in the Coola area. Colin is doing the filming tonight. And we'll also be showing two short films that have never been shown before about the built heritage of the Ireland. So that's next Monday evening. And thanks a lot to Paula for facilitating, and thanks a lot for Críostóir for coming along tonight as speaker. For me to walk with the
So the brilliant topic you've chosen this evening is Maire Neill, archivist and scholar of Irish folklore. I drove up here this evening calling her Maire Mac Neill, and I was quickly put right by locals. Apparently you've always called her Maire Mac Neill, so apologies for that, and I will now call her that from now on. Archivist, folklorist, collector. She's probably best known for her monumental work on the Festival of Lunasa. That has maybe overshadowed all the other fantastic work that she did as an author, as a thinker, and as a folklorist. And she was prolific in the area of folklore and history and language as well. She worked for the Department of Irish Folklore in the 30s and 40s, but she ended up living her life, the last 2 decades of her life, here in Corofin. And since I've come here tonight, and I'm only here, what, 3/4 of an hour or something, I've been hearing loads of stories. So I'm looking forward to hearing a lot more about her. In coming to live here in County Clare, she was part of a very strong connection between Folklore Commission and then the Department of Irish Folklore and then the National Folklore Collection, between that institution and County Clare for some reason or other, going back to James Delarby, who collected in Doolin, Patricia Lysett, who was from County Clare, Tom Munnelly, who at the time I knew him was the only full-time collector for the Department of Irish Folklore in Clare, right down to this evening's speaker, Dr. Críostóir Mac Cárthaigh, who is the very recently retired director of the National Folklore Collection, who very sensibly has come back to reclaim his Clare heritage and to live out the next 4 decades at least in County Clare, in West Clare. Críostóir has written on Irish oral literature, on oral history, on vernacular architecture, but I think here in the county we probably know him best for his incredible work on traditional boats and fishing traditions along the Atlantic coast, and of course his magnificent book, Traditional Boats of Ireland. Tonight though, his topic is Maire Mac Neill and that Clare connection, so please put your hands together for Dr. Críostóir Mac Cárthaigh.
Many thanks, Paula. That's a very kind introduction, and my thanks to Expo and to an old friend Tony for the invite. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here, and now I take on board the Mac Neill. in most published printed sources, she's generally Mac Neill with no space between, and I think she followed her father in that regards. Occasionally she has used Neill as well, and even Sweeney on one or two occasions as well, on a couple of publications. So what I've done here is to put together what I want to look really is her background, the context of her working life, and what she contributed as an archivist and a scholar to the Irish Folklore Commission, especially. She's rightly celebrated for this monumental work, which is out of print now. If you can get copies of it, grab them, because they are as rare as hen's teeth. And she's done a lot of other work in relation to Clare, of course. Maire Rua, Lady of Lemonade. We'll talk a little bit about that a little later. And she's also done a good number of translations, such as Sean O'Connell's book from Laura Connell, and also a book that is out of print is Fairy Legends from Donegal, which is both of these, especially for non-Irish readers, they're critical, this book and Fairy Legends from Donegal, as a kind of an intro to storytelling in Ireland, of the two major genres of storytelling, the folk tale, the long, complex tale, but also the shorter legends, which she was particularly interested in. So just a little bit of background about her, and my particular thanks to a couple of people for a number of these slides, namely Patricia Lysett, Professor Patricia Lysett, and Professor Maureen Murphy, who was a close friend of Maire, and she's from New York, and she's probably well known to people here. And indeed, many of you here probably remember Maire very well. I don't, I have to say. I didn't have the pleasure of meeting her, but I'm very familiar with her work, and as an archivist and more latterly director of the Folklore Commission, I'm very conscious of her contribution and her key role within the Folklore Commission. So, and that's really what I want to kind of focus on here tonight. But this is a nice photograph, and it's courtesy of Pádraig Ullachan, a wonderful singer from Armagh, who's written about, what's that called again, her book, Ulster
Songs from the oral tradition or something.
Yeah, fantastic, fantastic study.
Thank you, that's the correct title.
Neill, how are you?
Hidden Ulster.
Hidden Ulster, that's lovely. So yeah, Mac Neill was central to setting up the Coláiste Bhríde in O'Meath, And this is the MacNeill children, and I believe this here in the centre is Maire here. So they would have been steeped, the whole family, as we know, was steeped in politics, in revolution. Owen MacNeill, or often John MacNeill as he often referred to himself, was one of the founders of the Gaelic League, Cumann Gaeilge, instrumental in publications such as in Clive Sullish and others. He was a historian, but an expert in Celtic studies on top of it. And he was also, of course, one of the founding members of the Volunteers and a senior member of the IRB. So she would have grown up steeped in politics, as you can well imagine. Now the family hailed from, originally from Antrim, and it's for that reason that she came in touch with the Delargis. So you can see one of the Delargis here, and that was instrumental in her life. The Delargis came from Cushendall, County Antrim as well. So they would have mixed with, they would have been familiar with Roger Casement. Roger Casement was a regular visitor to the house in Dublin. The O'Reillys, so many people who were directly involved in 1916 and in the War of Independence. So they're central to Irish cultural life. She started after, and of course there was a lot of tragedy in the family. She lost her brother Brian, who was killed during the Civil War, and all of the upset that all of her brothers were in the Volunteers different times. So here she is in the Folklore Commission. She started work at the Folklore Commission full-time in 1935. Now, the commission had been established that year. Its honorary director, James Hamilton Delargy, Seamus of Delarga, and the two families were very, very close, MacNeills and the Delargys, partly because of the Antrim connection, but also the common shared interest in Celtic studies. Delargy studied in UCD under Douglas Hyde. She in turn also studied under Douglas Hyde and Osborne Bergen, and indeed would have attended lectures from her father, who she started her degree in 1922. He was appointed minister for First Minister for Education, but he was still the chair of Celtic Studies in UCD. So she got extremely good training in Old Irish and Early Irish, in the Irish language, of course, and that would have helped because the family, apart from going to the Cloister Vida in Omeath, they would have gone to the Aran Islands quite regularly. So she was very familiar, a fluent speaker, and had a lot of friends from the Aran Islands. By the Aran Islands, I mean Inishmore or Aran, as the people there refer to it as. And the Maggie Duran, one of the people who feature strongly in the Man of Iron film, they were close friends. And during the peak after 1916, the girls in the MacNeill family were sent to Aran for they spent a year there. So they would have been steeped in Aran, as we know, as we'll see shortly. They would have come back. She returned to Aran quite frequently and recorded folklore there. So, why was she appointed in 1935? She was appointed as office manager. This was a glorified, in many ways, secretary, administrator, typist, everything, translator for the commission. And she had a very good background because she had trained and worked as a journalist for several years. So she already had a lot of the necessary skills that the commission needed: bilingual, an understanding of folklore, excellent Irish, and so forth. So Delargy knew what he was getting, and she remained with the commission until 1949, when she got married. And of course, As some of you might be old enough to remember, there was such a thing as a marriage ban, and that was very much in force. So sadly, she had to leave the commission, but we'll talk again about that a little later. Now, I just want to some of the characters other than Delargy that were around her and that she learned from. On the left is Sean Masudawag, a Kerryman who was registrar and archivist of the Folklore Commission from 1935 until it was disbanded in 1971. Also Kevin Danaher. I remember both of these very well. Kevin taught us in UCD. Remarkable man. He was employed by the Commission too from 1935. Again, he had Irish, he had continental European languages. He was an expert in vernacular architecture, and if you like, the material cultural side of folklore. When I studied under Kevin, he was always keen, and indeed Buwan was to point out, you know, when you study folklore, you study the stories on the one hand, but you also study the material culture, how people lived, the economy, and by understanding the lifestyle and the material culture, you understood better the stories, you know, the impact of the stories. So these are two colleagues, and the older gentleman in the middle is a man called Karl Wilhelm von Sydow. He is the father of the actor Max von Sydow. Yeah, in all those Bergman films and so many more. I think he was in one of the very first Star Wars films, if I remember right. He was a very important figure in Irish folklore. From the 1910s, he was visiting Ireland. He came to live at the time of the height of the Anglo-Irish War, came to live in the Blaskets. The Great Blasket had learned Irish, became a fluent speaker and corresponded regularly with Peg Sayers, and indeed translated at least parts of her book into Swedish, for which he earned 5 Swedish pounds, which he sent to Peg Sayers, which he was very pleased with. But he's very much a father figure, a leading scholar of folklore in European terms, because he established really clearly for the first time what are the different categories of tradition. What's the difference between a legend, you know, which has elements of truth and realism, and what's and a folk tale or a hero tale, and also the function that storytelling has. So he's a very, very influential figure because of his interest in Old Norse and Icelandic literature. He realised very early, about 1900, that there was a strong link between the Icelandic tales, in particular the sagas, and the early Irish literature, and indeed contemporary storytelling. He once described Ireland as a laboratory for folklorists studying storytelling. So he recognised the strength of the tradition in Ireland, and he got to know Delargy and these two gentlemen here. Both of these men spent time in Sweden learning the system, because the Swedes from the late 19th century they were well ahead of us. They had been documenting their folklore and folk life, their material culture very carefully. They started by studying dialects and the various dialect words, and then it blossomed into a much wider, holistic study of folklore and folk life. So if you wanted to learn how to record and document and archive and analyse folklore, the place to go was Sweden. So he had very strong links and indeed was a strong supporter of the Folklore Commission. Apparently he's supposed to have marched into the Minister for Education, who was Ernest Blythe, I think, at the time, in the early 30s, and just insisted. He said, "You must set up a Folklore Commission, sir, immediately." And in any event, he was pushing on an open door, because particularly when Fianna Fáil got into power and De Valera was very sympathetic, they established the Folklore Commission, and they worked very much on the lines of the way the Swedes had organised the study of folklore and the collecting of folklore, So he was a very important figure, and indeed Maire Neill spent 2 months, 2.5 months I think, in Sweden working directly under von Sydow. So, you know, she got the best of training in you know, coming from a Celtic studies background and then into you know, modern folklore studies. And this is the archive as it stands. This archive, by the way, will shortly move into the main library in UCD, so any of you who want to visit and see the old place as it is, Neill, you won't recognise this if it moves. However, these are the manuscripts. And unlike Sweden, the Irish, pardon me, were very keen from the very word go to bind all of the responses, the interviews, the questionnaires that were coming in to the commission from the various collectors. They like to bind them in these nice manuscripts. The Swedes kind of tutted and said, "Why are you doing this?" And they simply explained, "Well, because we like manuscripts." And so it's very much part of an extension, if you like, of that medieval manuscript tradition. I mentioned Pegseris earlier, just to give you some little quick idea of the work of the Commission. You know, from 1935, essentially it was, their job was to collect, to preserve, and to, you know, to archive and to publish folklore. So this is a sample of a tale written down from Pegseris, Peg Bannigraheen, and it's by Siosabh Dálaigh. He's the writer, and like the Swedes before them, they were very careful to record all of the, if you like, biographical information, what we now call metadata, really today. And this was recorded by him in 1942. I think it was the year that she moved into the mainland from the island. She was then aged 70 and living in Baldacora. And using the Ediphone recording device. You'll see it now in the next slide, an example of it. And it's a folktale, Sean Beath He. In San Ancho Fadon, who reviewed Pagantiac, Neill, Vosnig and Crediv, Revehetat Kunkeen, agus Scullina, agus Lane, agus Scolari, Clishta, or Foot Natira, etc., etc. Now, the reason I'm showing this is because you have to be extremely careful, and O'Delarga and Sean O'Sullivan and Maire had the job of managing the correspondence and the links with the collectors in the field. At its peak, the Commission had 10 full-time collectors and a number of part-time collectors, and a lot of voluntary people around the country who were, you know, were correspondents but also part-time collectors. So accuracy and, you know, fidelity to the spoken word was the key thing. So, and also capturing as far as possible the dialect. In fact, they were very, very pointed about that. And when collectors began work for the Commission and submitted their first transcripts, they were checked by O'Delarga, O'Sullivan and Maire, corrected and then returned and told, write that out again, please. So they were very, very particular about accuracy. And this here just shows Tasok Fitone 183, the beginning of wax cylinder 183. And I just want to add her in brief Costello. Clare had its own preeminent queen of storytelling alongside Peg. Unfortunately, not as much was recorded from her as might have been. There's a lot of stuff written down with the Ediphone, but we do have sound recordings from her as well, made in 1950. She was blind, a woman living in Kibaha, originally from Oveen, in West Clare. Extraordinary storyteller. And here is the process of a collector who would have been very well known, and to Maire, and Maire was quite fond of, Kieran Boraid. He was based in Turlockmore, but he recorded quite a lot of Irish in North Clare, you know, west from Kinvara, west out to Glenina and as far as Fenor. So very important contribution to Clare, the study of Clare folklore and language indeed. And there's the Ediphone recording device. And just to explain, it's powered by a handle, it's a spring-loaded mechanism, and you simply wound it up, and you got a cylinder made of beeswax, and you could record a maximum of, we'll say, 800 or 900 words, thereabouts, on a cylinder. Sound quality was awful. If somebody was singing, they would generally sing the first verse and then recite subsequent verses of the song. But it was effectively, it was a dictation machine, primarily. So there were two settings on it, talk and listen. Beautifully simple. So when you spoke, you put the horn up to your mouth, and when you played it back, you put it up to your ear. So poor old Kieran's hearing towards the end of his life must have been in pretty bad shape. There's another example. Beautiful handwriting. All of the handwriting of the varies from collector to collector, but some of them were particularly neat, and they are things of beauty in themselves. So you had collectors in the field collecting away busily, recording people, but how to organise all of this information into an archive. Remember, archives were a novel thing. You had a records office, but an actual archive were very different things. So the Swedes came up with this basic system here, dividing human life, culture, society, etc. into these 14 or so headings. Settlement and dwelling, that would have covered the landscape, houses, farms, livelihood, household support, food, trades, so on, communication and trade, the community, education, the law, everything like that. Human life, the persons, a remarkable amount of information recorded. There's a full page of this, and this is all set out in this 700-page book prepared by Sean O'Sullivan and published in 1942. Extraordinary detail. I mean, for instance, here, there's a page long, a page full of questions for collectors on hair. What were the different terms for hair? Hairstyles, etc., etc. What were the various talismanic qualities or attributes of hair, and so forth. Folk medicine, again, very big section. Our understanding of the natural world, the landscape, the sky, the planets, everything. Times and feasts, festivals, etc. And then you get into the stuff about the fairies and all of that in these sections. Popular belief and practice, practice of magic, all of these things, and mythological tradition, and that includes, and we will have cause to refer to it later on, historical traditions, of course, very important in Ireland. Religious tradition, there's a huge amount of tradition in Ireland about the lives of the saints in particular, and the big section then, the rump section, is oral literature. These are the folk tales. So this became kind of a guidebook, a value of income for collectors, and it's still, anybody throughout the world who's interested in collecting folklore, guaranteed they'll have a copy of this to hand, because it's the most comprehensive. If you just look at, I have a couple of slides showing the contents pages, that'll just to glance at it, you get an idea of the detail that collectors went into. You know, questions that would occur to me, domestic animals and birds, cows, diseases and complaints of cattle and so on like that, practices, agriculture, trades, everything like that. So very, very comprehensive. And this really, the archive in UCD, in the National Folklore Collection, this is really centres around this. So if you're looking for information, that's your route in. It's by subject, rather than by place, although you can find things easily by place as well. And most recently, before I retired, the Dukas project, which is the National Folklore Collection online, has now begun to use this as a kind of a layer on top of all the content on the website. So if people are looking for information about a particular topic, you can zoom in on it. Now, back to Maire Mac Neill. She would have been schooled in all of these, and the key thing as material was coming in from collectors was to catalogue it. If it's not catalogued, it's not there effectively in an archive. This was a very, based on the structure, the framework of the handbook. This is the writing of Maire Mac Neill here. Cure for lung trouble, garlic steeped overnight in milk, stewed till soft, strained through muslin, to be taken 3 times a day. Now, what kind of lung trouble we don't know in particular. You have an example of historical tradition, man accused of belonging to the White Boys, hung without trial, an elegy written from Queen Hyde in the sauna, and that's from Cork. And this one's from County Laois, Adamstown in County Laois. So, much of her work, while she began work as an office manager, she very quickly became a cataloguer alongside Sean O'Sullivan, and between the two of them they were responsible. They had subsequently some more help, but the huge task of annotating all of those volumes, those collections of folklore coming in from Wexford, from Waterford, Cork, Kerry, you name it. And as a result, you have a card index amounting to about 300,000 cards on every conceivable topic, from fingernails to faction fights and much more besides. So she was really key to the operation of the commission at all times, but also kind of adding intellectually, enriching all of the material that was coming in, putting it into an intellectual framework, if you like. And alongside of this, of course, she did her own field work as well. She spent time in Arran, 2 trips during the war, years 1942 and 1944. Again, courtesy of Maureen Murphy, this photograph. There's a very good article, I'll refer to it again at the end, in Benidus in 2004. Very good account, many of you may not know it, written by Maureen Murphy, who was a very good friend of Maure's. So, just to give you some examples, they're not great, but Alba van der Heide in the Folklore Collection sent me these. So these are notes she made in 1944 of the people she recorded, spoke to. And George Dillon, from a weaver, he features in quite a lot of photographs. She says about him, well-informed and intelligent man, fond of talking, which was the essential qualification for anybody confronted by a folklore collector. And she writes a lot more about it, gives it much more detail, biographical detail. And very interesting. She notes in the course of this that he was using a light from the oil of the leaf-on. That's the sunfish, the leaf-on grana, the sunfish or basking shark, caught recently at Kilmurvey. He had the oil in a tin lid with a strip of cloth laid in it to form the wick. It was daylight at the time, so I could not say how strong the light would be at night. The flame seems quite strong. I was standing beside it and could get no odour from it. I had been told that there was sometimes a strong fishy smell from the oil, but I could not perceive any. So very good, very interesting pen pictures of people that she recorded. All the notes that she would have recorded, and by the way, all of these manuscript material is in the Folklore Collection. There is her papers are in the Folklore Collection, including all of the notes for the Festival of Lumasa and many other ones. But there's very, very useful material. Feasts of the Year, known to Maine as one of her informants. And it's just to go down through it, it's quite striking. Law in Breda, Law Magwinnel, Ihe Inida, Cading and Loitra, and Law, the Harris, down up in Smuth, Chalk Sunday, Law in the Padre, etc., etc. And then she has some very interesting material on knitting terms, because by, of course, Grey Para, I don't know if they started up by then, I think they had. They were fostering and developing the knitting industry in Ireland, and the Aran Islands, of course, were extremely popular. And after the Clancy brothers, they became even more popular. So again, very, very valuable, the terminology and clear English translations of them. Now, I want to turn to one of the really important tasks that she set herself from the late 30s on, and that is to manage the questionnaires that the Commission was sending out. Now, the questionnaires, this was an idea they got from the Swedes, that you could gather a lot of information by writing to people, by connecting with correspondence throughout Ireland. At its peak, they had about up to 600 correspondents from every county in Ireland. That was very much in the wake of the school's folklore collection in 1937-38. An awful lot of school teachers became very interested in the study of folklore and became voluntary correspondents of the Commission. So one way they realised of gathering detailed information about particular traditions, in this case the Feast of St. Bridget, February 1st, was to send out detailed questionnaires to people without overwhelming them with questions. They kind of refined it as they were going along, but you got a lot of very, very useful information, basically not so much for free, although it was gratis. This was there was a lot of goodwill out there, but it meant that you didn't have to send a collector out into the area to ask the questions. They depended on local people, a great many of them, as I say, teachers, to answer these questions. So in that way, a huge amount of information was gathered. There's just a picture taken by Tom Unnelly, the late Tom Unnelly, of Billy Boys at Kilgovnet in Kerry in 1974. And from these questionnaires, it was possible to produce distribution maps. Now, this is by Kevin Danaher in 1942. Kevin was actually in the army at the time, but in and out of the Commission. Maire McNeill was also trained, she got training in Sweden in ethnological mapping of traditions, in other words. And this is an example of her work on St. Martin's Day. This is very interesting. And you look at the distribution, for instance, the spilling of blood on St. Martin's Eve. That was very, very popular. Of course, St. Martin of Tours was very prominent. There was a lot of devotion to him in Clare. November the 11th is his feast day. And this was very widespread in Connacht and North Munster, South Leinster and parts of East Leinster, but you don't get it at all in Cork Kerry, interestingly. And nor do you get it in the many parts of the East Coast and in Ulster. Sadly, a lot of a gap, a lacuna there for we know in Ireland, sadly, but that's not the case for. We can take it from the map that certainly questionnaires were sent out to Northern Ireland. You can see a number of them there shown, but it very clearly shows that this is very much an older Gaelic Catholic tradition. And there's a wonderful photograph by Joe McGowan of a woman in Sligo drawing blood. So the idea was to spill blood around the house, in the corners of the house, and in the byre, and so forth. There's a huge amount of tradition around it. You know, on St. Martin's Day, you'd never go cycling, you wouldn't turn a wheel, because according to tradition, he was a miller, and he was crushed under a millstone. So you didn't weave, you didn't spin a wheel, you didn't cycle a bicycle. And if your neighbours were short of meat to celebrate the saint, you shared meat with them. And it was very, very important community dimension to it. Another example, and this is one about which she wrote herself. So the idea of wayside death cairns. I'll just show you a photograph and we can come back to the questionnaire. Here's an example from North Mayo. And you still see this tradition today. You know, the idea of putting memorials on the sides of roads where people have been killed. It's still quite common in parts of Wexford. There's a tradition that has lasted for a long, long time of putting little wooden crosses next to a place adjacent to where somebody was killed or died, whatever. So the idea being that when you pass this area, you picked up a stone and you added it to the heap, essentially. So they're memorials to the dead, and she has written about this, and it's very, very, very interesting. The origin of the heap does it mark the scene of a death or other disaster? What was that disaster? Does it mark the place where coffins are rested during halts in funeral processions? Is it a memorial to the dead raised by relatives, etc.? Does it mark a burial place? All of these basic questions, very important. Part of the inspiration for sending this out was the arrival of a German scholar, Hans Hartmann. He was familiar to the Commission in the 1930s, a German scholar, and he published a book. He also helped draft a very detailed questionnaire on death customs and funerary customs that went out in 1938. Hartmann kind of disappeared under a grey cloud. It turned out he was quite a Nazi and went back to Germany during the war and broadcast through Irish from Berlin along with Lord Haw and various other people. So quite a character. But the folklore at the time and still is very international in its nature. So there were French scholars and German scholars, American scholars, Scottish, strong links between Scotland and Ireland, and they were all coming in and out of the Commission. Now another major task was of course she and Sean O'Sullivan managed between them the organisation and administration of the school's folklore collection. That was a huge task. They captured over 20 tons of folklore. It's a bit of an exaggeration. But there is, in the bound version, which is online, of the notebooks submitted by all the schools, and about 5,000 schools throughout the then Free State, 26 counties participated. We also have the original copybooks that the children used. They have not been digitised. That's a huge task. There's about 20,000 of them. So that was a massive thing. Writing to schools, answering queries, travelling around the country because they had to persuade teachers and the INTO in particular that this was a worthwhile venture, getting school children to record folklore, and assure them via the Department of Education that this would not be extra work, that this would form part of the curriculum. So the INTO became the greatest supporter of the scheme. So here's a nice photograph of Fecal, National School, the Boys National School in 1938. And for the purposes of the collection, of the scheme, shall we call it, they produced a detailed 50-page pamphlet explaining, giving instructions what to do, how to record, with the experience of collecting, among part-time and full-time collectors, like not just bits of folklore that somebody heard, but who told the story, what age were they, what relation do you have to the person who's told you the story, and importantly, the precise townland that the information refers to. So it was extremely successful, as any of you who perused the collection on Lucas will testify. Very, very helpful in terms of local studies, and this gives you at a glance the number of schools that took part. So Clare is very well represented, and there's the beauty of the school's folklore collection, I suppose, is that it has a very even geographic distribution. It covers a lot of areas that weren't visited by full-time or part-time collectors. Sorry. And here's just a couple of examples from Ennistimon School. Proverbs, Féilín na Bliana, festivals, the principal feasts of the year are New Year's Day, St. John's Night, St. Stephen's Day, St. Martin's Day and St. Bridget's Day. And what's very interesting in some of these, that you get a mixture of Irish and English, because remember that a lot of these schools would have been in districts which were still Irish speaking, or they would have been like a Brac Gaeltacht, just on the edges of a Gaeltacht, or areas that were formerly Irish speaking and had made the language transition. So very, very, very important. So there she is in the Commission headquarters in St. Stephen's Green in 1948. Sean O'Sullivan standing behind her, and they're the very same drawers that are still in the folklore collection in UCD today. And this is only a year before she departed the scene. But she may have gone, but she didn't disappear. She would have been very much there. She is on the right hand side. James Hamilton de Largy, Seamus of de Larga, and his son. So the families remained very close, even after she retired. She married John Sweeney, an academic, a poet, and an art collector from Harvard in Boston. And she went on to teach there for a couple of years in the mid-1960s, and again contributed hugely to the study of Celtic studies and folklore in New England, in the States. Now, just a little bit about the translation. I've mentioned some of the publications. Sean O'Connell's book is a very good example of it, and just to give you a sense of her approach. Anybody who's translated before from one language to another will realise that it's not a simple, straightforward task. You have to bring with you the sense of what's being said into the other language, but you also must try and keep as closely as possible to the original as you can. So, free translation. I think you have to make it intelligible, but a good example of anyone who's ever read Robin Flower's translation of the Island Man, is a very interesting to read that, because he keeps almost word for word close to the original, but yet it makes a lot of sense. Makes more sense to Irish people probably, because there's so many idiomatic phrases and so on like that have come from Irish into English anyway. But a very, very difficult task. It's very slow. It's It's not mechanical, it requires an awful lot of work. And she said about her translation in relation to this, Sean O'Connell. Sean O'Connell, for those of you who are not aware, extraordinary storyteller, born in the mid-19th century. He was one of the first people that Seamus of the Larga collected from about 1923, shortly after he qualified in UCD. He used started recording by hand and then used the Ediphone. And it's an extraordinary collection, a very, very rich repertoire of stories. There's the long, complex tales, but also the shorter ones, the legends, and more besides. And she writes, I am trying to keep very close to the storyteller's words, and so making a close literal translation and keeping to his sentence structure and trying to always use the same translation of his idioms. My idea being his use of phrases and possible dependence on formulas are of some interest to folklorists. So, whereas in the 19th century people would have taken a lot of license the 19th century writers in representing stories that they heard told in Irish by people and translated them into English. They took a lot of liberty with them, effectively. But this is really, if you like, this and fairy legends from Donegal, which for her was a particular challenge because it was Donegal Irish, Ulster Irish, and she would have been schooled primarily in Connacht Irish from her time in the Aran Islands. So these are stories collected by the folklore collector Sean Hoy, brilliant collector, worked for several decades in Donegal, and she worked closely with the Seamus O'Connell also in these. So that was a huge task. But anybody interested in learning about the fairy faith in Ireland, that's the one to go for. And Maire, this was a real labour of love for her. She was very struck by Maire, and she did an awful lot of research on her background. And interestingly, as many of us will know, Maire is not well represented in Irish folklore, in Clare folklore. Now, she comes across as a bit of a tyrant, but Maire Mac Neill went to the trouble of understanding the context and the background, and the fact that she was somebody who was fighting for her land, for at the time the Cromwellian, the plantations and the redistribution of land, and set in that context a lot of the things that she did. For instance, she noted a very interesting point that she used to keep a very wild horse and used to invite people, visitors, to have a go on the horse. And this was, according to the folklore, to cause them to be thrown off and killed or whatever. But in actual fact, she very astutely recognised that getting a visitor to ride a horse was a test for Maire to see, it was a test of nobility. If you had a noble blood in you, you could succeed with the horse. So some very interesting things around her. But she has kind of, in her book, she I suppose, revisits and challenges a lot of the folklore that came down the years, because people tended to focus in on the very tyrannical aspect of her. And it's probably true to say that women in historical terms get treated much more harshly than men. If the folklore was about her husband, it might have been rather different, who knows. But a very interesting study nonetheless. Now, this is without doubt her major study, the Festival of Lughnasa. And years in the making, she devised a questionnaire distributed by the Commission. 195 people responded to her, and we'll see a distribution map in a minute showing where the various distributions are. But this, these are the questions. This is the questionnaire that she drafted, and you'll see the date July 1942, Garland Sunday. And I'm just going to go on to the next slide quickly. This is a table produced by Kevin Danaher, and I've just adapted it slightly. Kevin wrote about what he called the quarter-day festivals in Ireland. The Celtic calendar divided the year into 4 seasons, commencing February 1st, May 1st, August 1st, or end of July, beginning of August, and of course Samhain. Lunasa represents the autumn festival, the harvest time, and she traces from early literature mentions of the word of the god Lugh, about which we know a lot, not just from Irish sources but from continental sources, and all of the feasting and so on that went around that. Now, what Kevin has done is he's noted in this table all of the activities associated with the different quarter-day festival. For instance, the emphasis on seasonal work in the St. Bridget's Day the emphasis is on tillage. You know, people are looking after St. Bridget's Day. When can we sow the spoils? You know, weather prognostication, looking out for signs of weather. What will the coming weather be in the spring? Feasting is a feature of it. Bonfires, a feature of 3 of the quarter-day festivals, but not St. Bridget's Day, interestingly. Divination, divining the future. You know, will I be married? Will I live to be 90 years or whatever? All of those things, especially for children, very, very important. Spirits and the other world, the supernatural, that's a feature of, at this time of year, that they're out and about. And particular objects are associated with them. So the cross, obviously, St. Bridget's Day. Flowers, summer. So you still get that in parts of Clare. Somebody sent me a picture from, I forget where, with some above the windowsill, some gorse pinned on May Day. May bush in the east of the country. You tend to get a May bush decorated. The Lunasa, or Garland Sunday, as the name suggests, garlands of flowers. And again, crosses associated with Samhain. Processions are a feature of all of them. So going from house to house with the Brido, the Biddy. This is an image of St. Bridget. The May Queen. These are very common, and interestingly, these processions were very common in urban areas. Even in Belfast, apparently, right up into the early 20th century, you got May Queen processions. So generally, a handsome boy and girl marched at the head of a procession on the May Day. Also, the Lunasa is associated closely with mountains and the lakes, holy wells, prominent places away from areas of settlement and great entertainment. So, and of course, disguise and mummers very much associated with Samhain. So, in relation to Lunasa in particular, it was generally held on the last Sunday in July. It was known by various terms: Garland Sunday or Garlic Sunday. A lot of people refer to it as. Down at Crumdove. Crumdove was a pagan god, generally the youngest people in it's a bit like the St. John's bonfire, for instance. Younger people celebrated and feasted around them. There would have been sports, there would have been, contests between young men. There would have been plenty of courting going on in these places. So they're very, very striking. You still get a reflex of this today in, for instance, Kilpatrick. And she made the connection, saying that this was if you like, an appropriation of an earlier pagan festival by the early Christian church really a continuation, if you like, of the tradition. So the last Sunday, the week Sunday in Kilpatrick, it would have been important for the early church, if you like, to have the blessing of the older traditions, to incorporate those older traditions as far as possible. But you also get it in, for instance, anyone who's been to Ballycastle in County Antrim, they have the Lammas Fair in Ballycastle. There was one in Cornwall, I forget the place as well, until apparently recent. So, it survives in the English language. There was Lammas Tide, and that's from Lunasa ultimately. And as she sets out here very clearly, a lot of continental French, Belgian cities are named after Lug. Leiden is one of them, Lyon is another. There was a huge festival, a Gaulish festival held, and Lunasa devoted to the god Lug in Lyon, and the Emperor Augustus, very smartly, very cleverly, decided to rename it after himself. So, and that's how we have the month of August today. So, and in the east of Ireland as well, Stu, especially in parts of Wicklow and Highland areas, the Frochan festivals, picking whortleberries or blaeberries or bilberries. So in parts of the east it's often known as Bilberry or Blaeberry Sunday. A very, very important festival, and this really, nothing comparable has been done in terms of the Festival of St. Bridget. There's been quite a lot written, but there's still a lot more to be done, because the analysis that she made of not only those answers to questionnaires, 195 or so answers, she looked at the Ordnance Survey letters from the early 19th century. She looked at the early Irish literature. So she was perfectly placed to understand the literary tradition, the folk tradition, and if you like, the intellectual tradition of the 19th century, like John O'Donovan and Eugene O'Curry and people like that, who were going out and recording these traditions 100 years before the Folklore Commission was set up. So a very, very important step. And just briefly, we'll look again, that is the questionnaire. Was the last Sunday in July the first Sunday in August a special day? Was the day celebrated by a visit to a mountain top or eminence? The name, and so on. There's a mention of fruits being collected, bilberries, sports, frohans, local name please. Was the festival regarded as having religious significance? Was it connected with a saint? Was a fair held on or about that date? So those are the details of it, and here's a note that she recorded herself in 1938. So you can see already in 1938 this had interested her, and she recorded from told to me by Breed and Micheál O'Shearine in 1938. On Down Crum Dove, the young people of Portcloy climb up on the Duna and there amuse themselves a Cav Leinta, leaping about. Both boys and girls go, the boys assisting the girls in the stiff climb. Down at Crum Dove, the last Sunday in July. And there's another entry in another card for pattern generally held at, this is from Mayo as well, pattern generally held at Crosswell in townland of Kappa in the parish of Dunmore on Garland Sunday. Well was later defiled, pattern no longer held. And there it's Ballantyne and the collector who from his manuscript there was volume number 257, pages 101 to 102, and it's Liam McCuskela, the collector. And this is a note that she would have made from a book. Garland Sunday, it was the last day in July, a date set aside by the islanders for the purpose of paying a devotional visit to a shrine on the mainland 6 or 7 miles away. She's referring there to people of in Asir and in Shman in particular, who always came to St. Bridget's Well, Thou Frida in the Scanner, the night before the Sunday, and they would stay awake all night. There would be a certain amount of fairly restrained, not wild entertainment, but it was something that people in particular in this year really look forward to. And this is a note by a district nurse by the name of Hedeman, Glimpses of My Life in Ireland 1917. So here's a map showing a lot of the major heights, the pilgrimage mountains, the festive heights. You can see Slieve Callan was very prominent. On the southern flank of Slieve Callan is a place called Boylan and Graina, the milking place, the sunny milking place. And that's where, I think it's a fairly flat, I haven't gone up there, but it's a fairly level piece of ground. And you can imagine the fun, mainly young people again. But the church, of course, intervened and the authorities and clamped down on it and encouraged people instead to go to the Scanner, to Dalfrida. There's another two places mentioned there, holy well sites. One is Tubbagatuch, and the other one I'm not sure of, although I spent some time last night trying to locate that. So ancient assembly sites as well. She's marked, for instance, Teltown in County Meath, and that's very interesting. We'll just come back to that in just a moment. But there is the pattern of Maumane in the Maltach Mountains, County Galway. That was extremely popular. People would converge for miles and miles around and often there was in many cases in lowland places by the side of a lake, at a shrine of some kind. Mount Brandon, of course, another good example, and there's Slieve Callan and Dalfrida. Now, another interesting aspect she writes about, and she actually wrote about this separately as well, and this is ritual horse bathing, and it appears to have been very common at that time of the year, and was done. It was a ritual, almost ceremonial, the idea of driving cattle and horses into lakes and into the sea, symbolically cleaning them after the summer. But the thing that shocked a lot of people, this is Loch Owl, is that the men riding them bareback were all naked. And you can imagine what the authorities thought of that. And this is, I believe there's a copy of that here in Corofin, this notice here, and it's about Kilkee in 1833, that we have witnessed the disgraceful practice of bathing on the strand of Kilkee at all hours of the day, to the great annoyance of females who are, by such indecent exposures, prevented from exercising on the beach. And it goes on, that we are determined by every means in our power to put an end to the shameful custom which prevails of naked men riding horses through the water, and that the police shall receive instructions to seize all persons so offending, in order that they may be prosecuted according to law, and that all male persons bathing on the strand after the prescribed hour shall also be prosecuted. So it was almost like a police state 200 years ago in West Clare. So this is something that appears, there are, and she writes around the tantalising hints of this in surviving in parts of Scotland and in Brittany. It could be a very, very old, even pre-Celtic tradition associated with the arrival of a horse into Western Europe from Eastern Europe. Now, a very important thing she did too, she investigated the Great Assembly at Teltown. And she actually did a lot of field work. She spent some time interviewing people in and around Teltown. This is just north of Navan, between Navan and Slane there. And there was still, even then, in the 1950s, a lot of tradition about the old assembly. And of course, it was great. Not only was it an annual assembly going back many hundreds, possibly a couple of thousand years, but she was able to piece together a lot of very interesting information that archaeologists only today are now really taking note of. And she identified for the first time a roadway. Do you see where Cromwell's Road is marked there? This is a north-south road that runs through the whole area of Telltown and crosses the Blackwater River, and there's a ford and continues then south. And she thought maybe linked up with this east-west road. So her research, asking local people about place names and traditions that they heard, and believe it or not, a lot of these traditions, even over 1,000 years or more, are actually fairly consistent. And an archaeologist, Paul Gosling, has done a lot of work and brought her work to much greater notice. It was very, very interesting. So he has taken up her point about this ancient routeway, north-south. So people coming from the north of Ireland, people come from the south, converging on Talton, and of course it being a luminous site as well. So very, very interesting. And he writes a very interesting comment. This is Paul Gosling, and it's a piece in the Journal of Archaeology. MacNeill's proposal that a principal old road ran through Telltown arose from her research on Aonach as a luminous assembly site. While the main focus was on its folkloric and literary aspects, her research included a comprehensive examination of the topography of the area. This was based not only on interviews with local people, but also on a survey of the ground combined with scrutiny of maps and air photographs. The results were most vividly presented via a detailed map. And this is actually her map here, which then he has then worked into this much more fancier map, and he identifies the massive collection of prehistoric monuments and historic monuments in that area. So, her work is very, very interesting. And she writes, and this is from the book, the River Blackwater makes a U-loop around the southern part of the townland of Chelton here. So this area here, she describes it as an isthmus. Marshy ground liable to floods at both extensions of the U indicate that the southern portion of the townland may formerly have been all but surrounded by water or marsh, and was joined to the land only by a narrow isthmus of firm ground at its northern end. On the south bend of the loop there is a ford, and lanes north and south of the river lead to it. If one of the ancient routes led across this ford and through the loop land to the isthmus and so north, it can be seen that the place would have acquired importance strategically and communally. So it just goes to show the value of, to gather the information, the longevity of tradition, and to ask people locally the various questions. So a lot of scholars would dismiss what people have to say locally, but she didn't, with her background training, and to good effect. Now, in 1979, she gave a paper here in April 1979 on the folklore of the Burren, and I can make this available, Tony, if people are interested in it. The very first page is quite poor quality, but the rest of it is quite legible. And it's very, very interesting. She focuses in on a number of interesting aspects of folk tradition in the Burren in this paper. It's unpublished. Copies of it, the original is in, a typescript is in the folklore collection in UCD. But for instance, she talks, she was very interested obviously in Lore of the Saints. And she writes in it, other saints in Burren have left traditions in plenty, and a noticeable thing about them is the connection with Arran. When I came to live in North Clare, I was surprised to find a Glen Columcille there, and wondered how the saint from Tyrconnell found his way to the hidden glen where a church dedicated to him still remains. Tradition says he came from Arran, and the place he landed, Lac na Naomh, is still pointed out on the rocky shore below the Great Coast Road. Here too, near where he landed, Columcille is said to have built a church in the townland of Crumlin, and his teacher, Éine, the great saint of Arran, has a parish in Burren. Bracken and Macdúach are honoured in both places. In these traditions, one perceives a wavering light into the early days of Christianity in the region. At least two other travelling saints have left traces in local tradition, Brendan and Bridget. There are wells to Flannan of Killaloe and Ineen Vui of Kilnaboy, and this by no means exhausts the list of local or visiting saints. Now, another story she recorded, and it's very interesting, the story of the Kilcorny caves and the horses there. The two of the Donnan were coming, and this is from a school child in 1938, and she located a story in the Ordnance Survey letters recorded from a man called John Riach O'Cahain, who was a tailor from Corofin, and basically the story he told was recorded by Eugene O'Curry about a smith, this hereditary smith, the Gailen Gowa, a man by the name of Lum Maclifa. He had 3 arms and 1 leg, on which, however, he could travel swiftly. He was the first smith to make edged weapons in Ireland. He had stolen the marvellous cow in Spain and brought it to Slieve na Glasha because it was both a natural fortress and fertile. Here his 7 sons, each for a day in turn, herded the cow, whose gift it was that she could fill any vessel into which she was milked. All went well until a cunning woman milked her into a sieve, thus forming the 7 streams. So the tradition is very widespread in Ireland of this, the Gailen Gowa, the remarkable smith, and would have been probably going back to the time of the Celts' arrival, you know, with their iron and the importance of forging metal and producing very finely edged weapons. But the Glas Gainach, or Glas Gainach, is the cow that this smith had, and that idea is very, very common throughout Ireland. This miraculous cow who gives any amount of milk, but that somebody, a neighbour, unwittingly or deliberately tries to, just for the hell of it, to milk the cow into the sieve, and the cow eventually collapses and dies or disappears. So the story continued on into the 20th century, recorded by a school child at Kilfenora National School. The two of the Donnan were coming to a feast in Carron. They put their horses into the caves of Kilcorny for the night. They locked them in magic, and during the night the people were killed, and there was no one left to remove the magic. I'll come to the Gailen Gowa in a second now. Then the magic was undone, the huge stone was rolled back from the door of the cave, and out galloped the old mares and the young horses. When they were seen grazing in the fields, all the people ran out to catch them. They were frightened and galloped away, and the people succeeded in catching some of the old mares, but the young horses galloped off across the county and out over the cliff at the Cliffs of Moher. The Clare people are noted for having a great breed of horses ever since, naturally. So that's by way of introduction to the Gailen Gowa and the Glas Gainach, and which is preserved in, of course, the Glas Gainach Hill. How was that pronounced locally, by the way? Does anybody know of it? Glasgow. Right. So it's at the edge of Slieve na Glasha. So she records that story in her notes, its appearance in the old manuscripts, but also in the Ireland Survey letters. And here's a version from a child from Kilnaboy National School in 1938, Maire Nick Cushtina Code. Long ago there was a man living in this parish named Lunmaclifa. He had 3 hands and 1 leg. He was a great athlete. It said he jumped from Maire Mac Cárthaigh to Dublin. There were competitions in Spain to see who was the best athlete in the world. The prize was a great cow. The cow could fill the biggest vessel in the world. She was called the Glas Skyna. Lun was a smith and had his forge in Maire Mac Cárthaigh. He went to Spain and won the cow. He brought her home and he used let her out in a field every day. He had 7 sons and the youngest of them used to mind the cow every day, and she was put into a house at night. There was a witch living in the parish also, and she made a bet that she would get a vessel that she would not fill. So the witch got a milk strainer and kept on milking the cow until her heart broke and she fell dead. The place where she died is still to be seen, and not a blade of grass ever grew there since. The milk turned into water and comes out in 7 streams. They are called the 7 streams of Taoiseach. And of course the word Taoiseach means to bail out. Neill, am I right? Taoiseach?
Yes.
To bail something out, yeah. So it's interesting to see that there you have a tradition surviving over 100 years later, and through the agency of a scheme that she was instrumental in running, in administering, and close to where she eventually settled here in not far from Corofin. So I'm just coming to a close, and just last few words about it. She was conferred with a Doctor of Literature, National University of Ireland in 1964, and I think this is under a portrait of her father, Owen McNeill, if I'm not mistaken. So this was it's most unusual. This was published first in 1962. So within 2 years, such was the impact of it that she was given a doctor, an honorary doctorate on the strength of it. And from the 1950s, she had begun to come to Clare on holidays here to Corofin. And then in 1965, I think, or 66, she and her husband, John Sweeney, or Jack Sweeney, moved here permanently. And so hence the strong local connection. And I'm sure some of you here will have known her. I'll be very interested to hear some of your comments about her. And just to point out, there's several very interesting studies. Maureen Murphy, you see her here. The photograph is by Maureen Murphy. She's very close. Maureen taught for many years in Hofstra University in New York. She has written about her in Beilidus in 2005. There's also an entry in the Encyclopedia of Folklore and Literature, an international entry. And Rina O'Gowan, who many of you will know, also gave a talk and published in Leachty Columcille in 2005 an account of her life. So just to say that she was quite a remarkable woman, and very much interested in art, in high culture, but combined easily and moved from meeting with intellectuals in Dublin to being able to record, and from you and I, people in the street. So an absolutely remarkable woman, and she's left a great legacy. There are 4 boxes of papers in UCD, and if you contact them, they will give you a 3-page listing of the contents of all of those boxes. So, Gurmila Mahabub, and thanks again, Tony, for the invitation.
Críostóir, I don't know where to start. It's quite moving actually to sit and listen to you talking about Maire Mac Neill and to look in detail, at her studies of Lúnasa, and to compare it to the modern age. Like, I manage oral history and folklore archive here in the Ganty, Folklore. We spent about 2 years talking about how best to manage that archive and make it accessible, and of course it's all about programs and tagging audio, and to look at that and see that people had pens and paper and they did it all by hand and it worked, and it still works, and I know those card indexes in the archive. And I love the comment that they made to the Swedish archivists who give out to them for binding everything, and they said, "We like manuscripts here." It's wonderful. So magnificent work, and awe-inspiring really to see the kind of detail that is needed for that amazing study of Lúnasa. This is a question you might address in a couple of minutes, but you mentioned that it wasn't done in that detail for St. Bridget, and I'm wondering, could it be nowadays?
Yeah.
That the folk stories are still there, or the...
Yeah, but there's huge amount of material. There's about 10 volumes of replies, hundreds of replies from people throughout Ireland.
Oh, already existing in relation to Bridget.
In relation,
yeah.
She and Kevin Lanner ensured that all of those major festivals where questionnaires were sent out to find out information about all of them.
Okay, perfect. I'm going to throw it open to the floor in a minute, because I know you'll have lots of questions and I know you'll have lots of memories as well, and it'd be great to hear that. Just 2 things that Tony asked me to say and that I forgot in my introduction. And one is that today, the 15th of May, is the exact anniversary of the death of Maire Mac Neill. So she died on the 15th of May 1987. It's the 37th anniversary.
And which, just curiously, Paula, that's the same the day her father
was born. Yeah.
Isn't it?
If Owen Mac Neill was alive today, he'd be celebrating his 157th birthday right now. Yeah, which it's an incredible coincidence. Yeah. And then just one final thing, from my point of view, I work with Corofin Folklore, and Tony has asked us to maybe collect and record memories of Maire Mac Neill that are still in existence in Corofin, and we would love to talk to people who have memories. So chat away tonight, but I'll be watching you and I'll be writing down names, and Tony has a list already. So again, thank you so much, Críostóir, and open to the floor. Any questions, observations, memories that you have? Yeah.
I knew Maire on 2 fronts, socially and professionally, for a long, long time. And you might wonder, how did she come to Corofin? But my father was very friendly with Hamilton de Largy, and he was a regular visitor to the family home. And he must have brought Maire and Jack along once, and an immediate friendship sprung up between them. And they were both, my father was very literary, so was Jack. And Maire was in the middle. Hamilton was the catalyst that brought Maire to Corofin. I'll add the fact that my mother came from Omead as well, so there was a link between the two. Jack could be very grumpy at times.
The real stories coming out.
Maire could, without raising her voice, could throw oil on the stormy waters. And I go to the medical side now, she didn't have sleeping sickness, but she had a first cousin of it. At dinner, after, she wasn't a heavy drinker, after 1 or 2 glasses of wine, towards the end of the dinner, her head would drop And 10 seconds later, she was fast asleep. They left the bag on a place to wake her up.
Yeah, wow.
But just one other, having scanned the audience, I could tell this anecdote.
Oh dear.
She went to Boston first. She wanted to buy a twin set, and she went into Macy's, one of the Macy's stores, and she asked the girl, I'm looking for a twin set. And the girl said, what colour would you like? She said, do you have it in nigger brown? And of course, she got away with it at that time, but today, I see her brown trousers there.
Now we know the colour.
She was a wonderful, wonderful person.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah.
I think that, you know, sometimes people are probably appreciated and probably they give so much in the community in their own quiet way. You know, I mean, just probably not talking about you know, she was very talented and everything like that. But I remember walking through her house and I said, do you know, the most awful thing is ever to make a remark. And I said, Maura, I have only seen the pictures in your house in a museum. And she never answered me, you know, as if they were all copies. And I went over, and there is supposed to be a glare on, you know, reproductions, you know, you can spot it, you know, in light. And I couldn't see the glare, and I was very, very puzzled. But she also, she knew that I was very friendly with a few writers, you know, John Quinn and a few, and she invited them to her house. The graciousness of her was unbelievable, you know, because, you know, it seemed to generate such an acceptance of culture as well, you know. And of course, those paintings were donated to the National Gallery, and I could see, you know, that they were, you know, the medieval, you know, triplex and the, you know, there was a Monet,
There's a Picasso, isn't there?
Yes, Picasso, and I could see that. And no, she was not going to boast. You know, she was so honest. So it was a real privilege to have known her and to know that a woman of such talent could also probably have tongue-in-cheek, probably to this very rude person to be making remarks about, you know, her decor and, you know, her treasures.
That's lovely tribute, and I think what I've heard, she carried her learning very lightly, you know,
Yes,
scholarship,
yes.
and you know, that modesty, that self-effacing
Yes.
quality, and I think to some degree she would have learned that too, you know, working with recording people,
Yes.
listening to people, learning to listen,
Yes.
very, very important. That's a lovely tribute.
Is she buried in Rowan graveyard?
Rowan.
Do you have that information?
Yes.
Rowan.
We went to see Rowan, yeah.
I just come across
Oh,
this.
There was no graveyard in Corofin when she died.
Yes.
So that's why she was buried in Rowan, because people were surprised that she wasn't buried here.
Yes.
But she's over in Rowan, the two of them together.
We were wondering earlier, was it you, Críostóir, that she was buried here? I know she lived here 20 years, but that she didn't go back to Dublin to be buried, but maybe because her husband was American, maybe this was actually home.
Yeah.
And has anyone visited the grave recently?
Yeah, we did last week, yeah.
I think it's flat, isn't it?
It's a flat, there's no headstones on the ground, yeah. There just was no, I'd say they would have been buried in Corofin had there been a graveyard.
Yeah.
The Harry Clark windows, they must have paid thousands for, you know, are in a church in Donegal, you know, that was Sweeney's father, you know, so those, you know, they were contributing in their own way, the two of them, to so many things. And I'd say in Boston there'd be a lot of stories as well.
Anybody else wanted to?
Just one thing on the 11th of November. I'm a farmer, or at least I was. My son is working these days, but on the 11th of November we killed a sheep. A hogget would be a year and a half. They didn't kill lambs much in those days, but anyway. By the time you had to share it with the neighbours, and by the time you had it all shared with the neighbours, you had to get enough for that.
And that was going back to St. Martin's Day, wasn't it? So it wasn't fowl, it wasn't a hen or anything like that. It was actually a hogget.
We always had sheep, so we always wanted to do.
You'd be more familiar with that.
Well, the idea of the fowl, you know, it's easy
Just
to carry the fowl around the house and
Yeah.
spilling in the symbolic spilling in blood. Yeah. But it's very interesting to hear that, yeah.
There was a lovely line out of the note today, write it down, when you showed the map of the St. Martin's where the tradition was carried out, and there were 4 different categories, and one was vague memories of blood spilling in the past. I like that one. Anybody else wanted to make a comment or share a memory?
Just before they
Yeah.
built their house, they used to spend the summers here. They used to rent Stephen O'Mara's house directly across the lake from them, and then they did it for 5 or 6 summers in a row. And then they said, okay, we're going to build. So there's no planning applications in those days at all. So they picked their site and built a lovely house. And it had 10 million worth of paintings hanging on the wall, uninsured. There was just a small thing. There was a woman who used to go over and help with the washing up, and that. She brought her daughter over one day, who was about 12 or thereabouts, and she was talking to Jack, and she said, you know, we're starting up a youth club in Corofin, and we're looking for pictures. She pointed at the Picasso. It was worth 6 million. Wouldn't that be lovely? No. Oh, Jack was in the King's at that.
Yeah, I was just going to say, they bought the land off my granddad. He was Jim Mulqueeny, where they built their house.
Yes. Okay.
And my father got one field from his uncle.
Yeah.
And in time they bought that field as well. My father swapped it for more land that came up for sale near him.
Is there a music connection to that Mulqueeny family?
No, I don't.
No? Okay. I think there's something else.
There is the same Mulqueenys, the minister, they call themselves Mulqueenys today.
Okay. They dropped the final syllable.
Yeah. We're always Mulqueenys.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do you know anything about the Donegal connection?
Oh, this is the man to ask.
Because she's writing about the fairies of Donegal. Is that because of her husband being hailing from there originally?
I think that would have been coincidental, because Shauna Hoddy, the collector, she knew, and she was very convinced of the importance of presenting original Irish language material, making it available for scholars through the medium of English. And he was recognised as one of the best collectors in the country, and he had a huge amount. He had published already in the mid-50s 2 volumes of this religious journal, in which he wrote a lot about the fairy legends. And that appealed to her, the mythological dimension of the fairies and fairy faith, I think appealed to her. So I think that's what drew her to doing it. I don't think her husband had a hand in it. May have been. They could have been visiting Donegal and met John O'Hoy, Teelan, and persuaded that you are doing.
But when Barry Cook came to Ireland first, he was very poor, you know, and Jack Sweeney actually bankrolled him for a long time by buying his paintings. They rented a house over the Bank-Isle Road, and there was no central heating, of course. They weren't too happy with that, and Barry Cook wasn't too happy with that, so he was lighting a big fire, throw all the coals into a bucket, and then go off up to bed with a bucket of coals. But he did a beautiful oil painting of Maire. It's in the National Gallery up in Parnell Square.
An oil painting of
Maire.
Of Maire. Oh yes. Any other contributions? Yeah.
Less than complimentary, she was a demon driver.
But you
She
can
lived up the road past me and she just dreading meeting her. She took beeping her horn at every half
speed or just inaccuracy?
Mostly inaccuracy.
Críostóir, thank you so much again, unless there's a last question or comment. Thank you so much for really so the chat can continue further out here. Thank you.